Happening now, we'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America, through Central America, and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room for November the 21st, 2018, episode 115. I am Wes Fryer, coming to you from Oklahoma City, where I am the Director of Technology at the Cassidy School, and certainly attired for a vacation day. So full disclosure, time got away from us a little bit with the pre-holiday festivities, and I was not here at the top of the hour to be with Jason. But Jason, you are coming from interesting parts far afield. So where are you joining us from tonight?
Yes, good evening. I am on the west coast of Costa Rica, where my wife and I will be spending the next week in a small bed and breakfast just off of the ocean. And we spent Monday and Tuesday traveling here, got here late yesterday afternoon, have already experienced wonderful local seafood, and I actually worked today out of the bed and breakfast here, and so had decent enough internet to be able to do my job, where I am the assistant director and curriculum director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located in the University of Montana campus in fabulous Missoula, Montana, and tonight coming from parts unknown. And I have to apologize, my lighting's a little rough because it's actually, I'm in your time zone tonight, Wes, and in this particular case, the B&B is such that I can't use my regular long broadcasting voice, so the lights are dim. I have a temporary flashlight if I need it. I suppose I could do the park is closed sort of thing. So
we want to go for a Blair Witch Project feel. We'll go for the flashlight.
I'm glad I've almost made the reference, and I'm glad you did. So for those of you new to the EdTech Situation Room, first, happy holidays to those in the United States, where it is Thanksgiving week and Thanksgiving Day tomorrow. For those of you joining us for the first time at the EdTech Situation Room, we are a podcast that looks at tech news through an educational lens. And so we kind of comb through the headlines each week looking for interesting bits of information we can share with you, the listener, and talk a little bit about how it might impact education. And as it turns out, it's usually a slow news week during Thanksgiving week, but there's still some wonderful headlines that we'll talk through during the podcast tonight. And for those of you interested, we always post our show notes and links to every article we refer to at our website, edtechsr.com. And so, Wes, where would you like us to start tonight?
All right. Well, thank you so much for picking up the slack on the article links. I will drop in and probably move a couple from last week, but I guess I'll start with an outage link. We do not use Active Directory for all of our users at school, and as many listeners probably know, Active Directory is Microsoft's directory that helps you keep track of users and devices and assign rights to be able to get to shared folders and things like that. And Microsoft, like many companies, probably all companies, maybe you could say, is on this path of migrating to the cloud. And so the article that I dropped in our Microsoft category was from TechCrunch on November 19th. Office 365 Azure users are locked out after a global multi-factor authentication outage. And the other thing that I didn't actually, I don't know if I've seen an article for this, but on Friday, LastPass actually had an outage, and we have recommended the use of LastPass as a password manager to all of our faculty staff. We don't manage it. We're not taking responsibility for that. We recommend people use some kind of a password manager, and that's the primary ones that's free that we've recommended. But anyway, they had said your offline mode is working, but anyway, some fairly significant administrators in our organization were unable to get into their LastPass, and that presented some problems. So I looked at their Twitter, and they've got a Twitter update handle, and things were back online. But both of those are certainly some pretty substantial problems if you are relying upon the cloud to authenticate via Azure and Microsoft's world, and then also in the world of LastPass. So any thoughts about this, Jason? And were you affected at all? You were traveling en route, so I'm going to guess you were probably in the clear, not relying on either of those platforms.
So it's funny you should mention that, because one of the things I did do is I moved to an older phone for this trip, and I had read some information to suggest that electronic devices were of particular interest of pickpockets in this general region. I'm usually pretty good about that. I've never had a real issue with that. But trying to be, a safety-minded individual, I'm carrying around an old Chromebook with me this week and an old phone with a broken screen on it as my main drivers. And so I had to restore my Android instance to this phone and have everything down on there. And I couldn't get Microsoft Authenticator to work when I was doing so, setting that up. And as it turns out, I think that was the reason why, because I was able to do so yesterday waiting in an airport in Miami, but was not able to do that before. So, this is an interesting discussion because I've never been directly a part of the cloud versus non-cloud discussion, but the thing you always hear about is, what if the cloud goes down? I can tell you my general experience has been working in two school districts as a teacher that the cloud-based services have never gone out as much as file and print services have in districts that have, localized servers structures. But yeah, it's a real risk of putting things up on the cloud. I still think that I would trust an enterprise-level service like Microsoft or Google or LastPass, for that matter, for user services over something that happened more locally. Because it's hard to maintain hardware, and almost every school is vastly understaffed from an IT standpoint. But the saddest part about that to me is that it adds fuel to the argument that the cloud is inferior to local hosting of services. So I think that article is interesting and certainly explains some minor outages that I experienced earlier as well.
I know you put another article in there talking about Microsoft and Google's development of Chrome for Windows on ARM. You want to pick up that one?
Sure, I'd love to. As reported previously on this podcast, Microsoft has been experiencing with Windows for ARM, and ARM is the chip that's sitting in your mobile phone. It's a highly battery-sipping chip. It uses very little battery in comparison to the output it puts out, and compared to Intel or x86 chips, as they're sometimes called, they have a lot of advantages to them. And right now, Windows has a couple of laptops and kind of convertible tablets available that run Windows for ARM on it. But the biggest problem has been software compatibility. The actual hardware and the operating system are wonderful in that they oftentimes provide insane battery life. I've seen estimates saying that laptops are getting 20, 22 hours of battery life while maintaining a relatively low temperature, which is not unlike some of the outputs that the higher end phones get that are sitting in your pocket. And if Microsoft can figure this out, not unlike what Apple has done with the iPad, it could really create some really wonderful long battery life devices. However, the biggest problem has been that on the Microsoft side, that there just isn't compatibility with their existing program architecture, which means that a very limited set of programs runs on Windows for ARM. However, as the article I'm citing tonight, which is from The Verge from today, I believe, Google is now working actively with Microsoft to come up with Chrome for ARM, which will be a massive step forward for Microsoft. One of in my mind, the biggest disadvantages of Windows ARM devices, it's not that it can't run all programs, it's that it can't run a handful, one or two programs I think are critical for power users. And in my mind, Chrome is one of those, that if you're stuck in the Edge browser, and I will admit the Edge browser is infinitely better than Internet Explorer, but it's still, in my mind, pretty deficient to where Chrome is in 2018. And so good on Microsoft and Google for working towards a solution to this. And I think it's going to make Windows laptops, especially if they end up moving towards the ARM architecture, that much better of a platform.
Shout out to Peggy George, who's joining us in our chat room, and she's asking why you are in the dark. Peggy Jason is actually joining us from a remote Central American location where he is undercover for the EdTech community, attempting to infiltrate the Microsoft bastion of guerrillas that are there, hiding in mountains. And so he's actually smuggled a number of Chrome devices, but he's having to be camouflaged. Actually, some of that is true. He is in Central America, but it has to do with his bed and breakfast context there. So,
yep. Okay, so where to next?
I would love to go to the tech correction section. So as some of you may know, Jason has coined this phrase, the technology correction or the tech correction, as we see hearings in Congress and lots of very justified angst and anger, even on the part of folks, in terms of the ways in which information is being weaponized and used to do things that we probably did not realize. And I tweeted this article between our last show and this, but this was an op-ed by Nina Jankowicz in the Washington Post, and it immediately made me think of Jason and the tech correction. And this is from November 15th, and it's called "It's Time to Start Regulating Facebook." And I've seen a number of articles like this in not just the past week, but this is the tech correction, is the pendulum swinging. And I gotta say, I think I totally agree. I have watched most of the PBS Frontline special called The Facebook Dilemma, which I mentioned on the show last week. And it just really portrays Facebook as recklessly irresponsible, particularly in parts of the developing world where Facebook has become, I think, as we talked about last week, synonymous with the internet, much in the way of, picking up a tissue. Some of us might say Kleenex, because that's just that, or Coke, in some parts of the country, a soft drink it's a Coke. So Facebook has become synonymous in countries like the Philippines, like Myanmar, I think in Indonesia as well. And, in those places, it's just so irresponsible, the lack of native language speakers that Facebook had on staff, and the ways in which they, just did not. I guess maybe you can't hold them responsible for not being able to anticipate everything, but once you see what's happening, not responding, it just really is problematic. So I think today in this article about regulating Facebook really raises the issue. We've just heard so many apologies. We've heard so many, we're trying, it's hard. I just don't think it's good enough. And so I'm ready to see Congress step in and regulate. And I know that's kind of a different tone than I've taken before. So your thoughts on this, Jason? Are you ready to light the torches and grab the pitchforks and give Congress the thumbs up from Montana, at least from where you sit on the regulation of perhaps more than just Facebook, but specifically Facebook and the ways in which they've fallen down on the job?
Sure, especially as an analog of social media. I think you're very correct, Wes, that people, in the same way, remember when the word Google was synonymous with the internet a long time ago, that people were Googling things like that was the entirety of the internet. And I think Facebook has become that in no small way. The other articles that I think go, and by the way, Wes, I think you saw that you got a shout out back from the author of the article from the Washington Post after you tweeted that she thanked you for reading. So there's other interesting pieces of support from this week. And the first and foremost is a really great article from The Verge on November 19th. And basically what it does is it goes over, there's been a lot of news in the last 15 days or so on Facebook, including some exposés in the New York Times that talk a little bit about, essentially Mark Zuckerberg as a hands-off CEO when it comes to a lot of this Russia stuff. It calls to task the COO, Sheryl Sandberg, who initially pushed back very aggressively against any regulation of perceived Russian influence in the election via Facebook. There's also some suggestions that that Facebook needs to be a little more, deft in the way it treats George Soros and his crew. And now Sheryl Sandberg and George Soros will be meeting to talk a little bit about his influence in particularly left circles, and he's very concerned that Facebook has helped perpetuating the notion that there is this mass Jewish conspiracy around the world led by billionaires like George Soros. I put that article there because it does a great job of explaining some of the broader claims in the last couple of weeks related to Facebook. But I think there are a couple other things here that are very much at task, and I'll talk a couple of these individually. First, there's a wonderful article from the New York Times on November 15th that basically talks to CS students in college, and many of them specifically called out Facebook as a place where they don't want to work. And the reason why I think that's interesting is because that puts Facebook clearly out of the kind of new CS graduate kitsch that it's had over the last 15 years. And I think the same thing is also happening down the street in Palo Alto at the Google headquarters, right? There's this notion that graduates don't want to go make six-figure salaries at these big, massive technology players now, because they question whether or not the work they're doing is the good work they claim it is, and more importantly, they don't want to be part of something that's going to eventually be blamed for all sorts of social ills. And I think it's a real sign of a turnaround in social media, and maybe more broadly, like using technology correction trademark, that's certainly a part of what this is. But I think that's a real sign, a canary in the coal mine, if you will, that the times have changed, and it isn't necessarily like people aren't necessarily sticking with the technology companies that brought us here, that they're looking for new ways to innovate and new ways to engage. When I read the computer science article from the New York Times, I was very much reminded that there was an alternative to Facebook that was created by Dave Morin. He was an early Facebook guy, and Dave happens to be a graduate of Capitol High School, the school I taught in Helena, Montana. Dave's a great guy, smart guy, very brilliant, married to Britt Morin, who runs a Brit and Company, a kind of a younger lifestyle brand in California, and both do really great work. But he started something called Path, and Path was a social media tool that limited the number of connections you could have. And they had a scientifically generated number of 100 and something odd connections, saying that you can really only have meaningful interaction with 100 and some odd people. And that eventually was sold off, and that was recently closed. I think it was to a Korean company, and Path recently closed. But it feels like that was an early indication, when an early Facebook person was, noting that there was something maybe inherently inhuman about the way Facebook was going about the collection of connections and trying to push that sharing ethic. And so that's the fact that CS majors seem to be going that direction, I think is a pretty interesting development. And then one other side note, and we'll jump into those other articles that you threw in, Wes. There was a BBC reported today about a movement that a company that's looking to become a Facebook whistleblower is starting to advertise on Facebook to Facebook employees to say that they would love to become the object of internal whistleblowing at Facebook. And the reason why I mention this ad is funny. It's interesting, right? But it also, and that this was covered in the article. The BBC article talks about that you can actually do that, right? Like, that's one of the things about Facebook advertising. The reason why it's so effective is that you can micro-target fairly aggressively. And in this case, they're targeting their advertisement just towards people that work at Facebook at the central offices in Silicon Valley. And that wouldn't be possible with, first of all, a lot of other tools, right? And then more importantly, it certainly would have been possible pre-Facebook to target advertising in that way. You would have had to create handouts and advertisements and leaflets that you would hand directly to people you knew to be Facebook employees, and yet that technology it very much exists today because of Facebook. So where are you at with the correction, Wes?
Well, one of my thoughts is that we need to be prepared as technology leaders and educators to have answers for folks that are going to have questions about this. One of the biggest differences between, Google, for instance, and Facebook, especially with regard to schools, number one is that Google is providing us with incredibly powerful productivity and collaboration tools that are of immense value, right? Like, I don't have the exact percentage, but I'm pretty sure that well over 50% of our staff, maybe now 8 years, 9 years or so, I guess I could look that up, as far as being moved over to Google, from Exchange and from really a purely Microsoft Office productivity suite standpoint. We still got, versions of Office that are being used and run, and there's people who are not going to, let go of those. And I'm not saying, by the way, for anyone from our school who's listening, that in a way, but there's a lot of our users, myself included, that just don't use Microsoft Office very much anymore. And I really, really value, and many of us do, those kinds of tools. It's really important to understand how, Google is not gathering data on students that are part of the G Suite for Education, service. And so, obviously part of Google's game is to get students to love their products and to be able to utilize them and to use Gmail and, to have a lifetime of utilizing Google, and Google utilizes, information that they glean from users and from behavior in order to sell ads to advertisers and to participate in that kind of extractive model, I guess. And so on that note, I would mention two other related articles. One of these is a little bit older, but it's from Dana Boyd, Dr. Dana Boyd, who is a scholar that I deeply respect. And this is from her blog. It's called The Messy Fourth Estate. And she published it on June 20th, 2018, both on her blog and then out on Medium. And, she is talking about journalism and how journalism is broken, but this whole foundation of being an extractive model, right? Like where we're going to extract value from our users in order to monetize and provide profitability. And so I think, full disclosure, heads up, Dana is very left of center in terms of her political persuasion. I think it's an outstanding article, and it's very thought-provoking because she's calling on people to question her thinking and to provide feedback, but saying we're going to have to rethink some models here, including the one that is basically keeping journalism afloat. And on the Facebook to Google comparison, the other article that I'll highlight has to do with this platform that Facebook has put out. This is from the Washington Post. I put this near the bottom of our show notes. Washington Post on November 17th, 2018. Students protest Zuckerberg-backed digital learning program and ask him, what gives you this right? And I remember hearing about this a couple years ago. This is a platform that is called, I think it's called Summit.
Summit Learning, yeah.
Yeah. And so, and I know that we've got a number of Oklahoma City public schools, utilizing it. It's a learning management system. It's you're probably going to be able to fill in more blanks about it and kind of where it fits into the ecosystem. My understanding is, like Google Classroom or Canvas or some other learning management systems, but I think it has content too that goes with it. Right. And so anyway, just really, really interesting to have, we need to be, asking questions and being critical and not just blindly, grabbing onto anything that's free, because as we've said multiple times on the show, and it's a key lesson of digital citizenship that we want our students to understand that, if it's for free, you very well may be the product. And so our data is often the product. So do you have any experience with that Summit Learning platform or insights into that?
I do know quite a bit about Summit Learning, and now that I think about this out loud, I have no idea why we haven't talked about this yet, because it's kind of a big deal. So Summit Learning is, I think, either primarily or absolutely supported by the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation, which is the philanthropy arm of the Zuckerberg family, and it's a very interesting platform. It's built on top of Google Docs, and it essentially it's advertised as a digitally enhanced digital platform for personalizing learning. And I've been I've observed 2 schools engaged in this. I am colleagues with 2 teachers that work in this platform, and I also have had conversations with at least another dozen or so constituents, whether it's a teacher, an administrator, a parent, or in a couple of cases, kids that are through this process. And we evaluated it pretty early on in this game. There are digital schools that use the Summit Learning platform, but we were pretty aggressively scared off by the extraordinary data sharing requirements that are required by this. And in fact, if you go into Summit Learning, there's been a lot of interesting pushbacks on Summit. I had not read this particular article from the Washington Post, and thanks for putting that in, Wes, because that's very interesting. I'm going to share that with some folks after we're done here tonight. But so a couple observations about it. The first one is that in the era of Facebook, it's Facebook scandals, right? Like it feels like that this, even if it's providing good, and I have no knowledge to know whether or not there's real efficacy to this model or not, it's clearly going to end up not existing at some point, right? Like I think this either gets broken apart into pieces and doesn't exist in the future, or it has to radically change, because the initial model was based on, I think, kind of a big data notion that by having access to all the student data, you could make maybe instructional decisions based off of this. But that, I mean, the value proposition in that, I think, is called into question. I have a couple of observations from parents and teachers in the model. Positively, it does seem to provide an opportunity for kids that traditionally go a little slower than the curriculum pace to be able to master items before they move on. Although any good mastery learning format, that mastery learning has been something that's existed theoretically in education for nearly 4 decades now. So mastery learning on its own is not a new phenomenon, but I have heard from a couple of educators very positively that they felt like it gave them more tools to deal with students that go slower than the traditional process. I've also heard some feedback from educators using the product that they felt like that they were giving more direct feedback to students, and that they felt as if that the platform enabled them to make good decisions there. On the flip side of the coin, I have a colleague, a professor, that has a student that was in a middle school that had been utilizing the Summit Learning platform, and they felt as if the teacher had kind of checked out of the class completely. This was a math class. His son was struggling in math, and when he kept asking questions, the teacher kept referring the kid back to the computer tutorials as opposed to trying to diagnose the problem and do something. I think it's every kind of stereotypical nightmare we have about computers, that teachers are relegated to being at best technical support, right? At worst, hiding behind their own computer, not engaging with students. And it goes back to, in my mind, that if you're treating technology like it's a replacement for you, it probably is replacing you, and not in a good way or in a positive way, but rather in a very negative and I think kind of almost dystopian way. And then I've also received from feedback from, this was a teacher that's teaching the program, that she felt completely and utterly overwhelmed by the amount of grading, because there was a high expectation of feedback for students. And, I want to be clear, I think feedback is a critical part of the student-teacher component, but she felt like she was grading almost constantly and wasn't able to really give students what they needed to move on. That despite the fact that papers were stacking up, and to be honest, I have a lot of English teacher friends that feel the same way about many different ways of teaching. If you're doing the feedback and grading that you should be doing, it's quite overwhelming. I think that it's a weird time for Facebook connected money to be pushing into politics, right? And this Summit Learning, I think, is 3 years old now. So this takes us back to just before the 2016 election. I think any massive data grab is pretty suspect. But the other piece too that I think is also critical is that if teaching is done right, it can't be replaced by technology and a computer. And if we're relegating, like the teacher-student interaction to mostly computer-based tutorials as opposed to direct interaction, what's required, I also think you're doing technology wrong. And so I know it's an interesting piece, and I'm really curious to see, and I just read that letter as you were talking about it, and it's a pretty eloquent criticism, I think, of the platform and of the situation with Summit Learning.
Couple of segues there. Had a great opportunity to go up to Kansas last weekend with our daughter and one of my son's actual best friends from high school. That's a good friend of ours, and anyway, just had a wide ranging conversation. He's a junior also, but he's at the University of Oklahoma. We were talking about technology and classes and teachers, and he was asking me, well, what is your favorite pedagogy? So Jason, that would be a great blogging challenge. Actually, we could throw that out. I mean, that, given blended learning, given platforms of, learning management systems and all these tools, what is the ideal pedagogy? I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but I'm going to have a chance to teach I think it's an 8-week course for the University of Northern Iowa in May and June. It's a producing educational media course with Dr. Lee Zeitz has recruited me to come on as an adjunct. But I'm really looking forward to that opportunity to, consider they have a model of Tuesday night, hour and a half Zoom video conferencing, paired with offline learning and projects that students make. But anyway, I think that's a relevant question, and it's one that all of us as educators, need to be grappling with, right? Because to varying degrees, we have access to these kinds of tools. If you're certainly in your case, Jason, working with instructors that are teaching in a fully online environment, then that is your world. But even, in my case, where we've got a very limited number of students, actually just a few but seniors really that are taking part in this Malone network. It's called MSON, but it's a partnership with Stanford. Actually, Peggy got to get in on a neat little free webinar, or I guess online conference that they did a couple weeks ago. But anyway, short of that, which I don't know if that touches maybe 20 students, the vast bulk of our students are face-to-face, but teachers have the opportunity to utilize, we have this Blackbaud on campus LMS or Google Classroom and all these other tools. So how do you weave those, and what do you define as the best type of pedagogy and interactive experience for students, given a particular domain of curriculum? The other thought that I had to this, in terms of the broad discussion of Facebook and kind of how much their tentacles have gone out in different directions, and then talking about the summit learning, into learning management, it makes me think about, antitrust actually in the United States, and the decisions that allowed Facebook to purchase Instagram, right? One of the biggest competitors, then WhatsApp. I mean, I really hope that the tech correction means a pendulum shift back, instead of allowing, these vast companies to just continue to gobble up and get bigger and bigger. I think we would be better off today, frankly, if Facebook did not own Instagram and that was an independent company competing with Facebook. Similarly with WhatsApp. I guess I do. I know you have I think a Geek of the Week tonight that touches on T-Mobile. I'm a big T-Mobile fan. I want to see T-Mobile succeed. I personally think that the merger with Sprint, it's being couched as, got to compete with Verizon, AT&T. If we don't merge, we're not going to be competitive. But anyway, that is actually a pretty strong discussion topic, whether you are teaching economics or not. If you're talking about current events, if you're talking about governance, right? The role that the government has in choosing how to regulate, and the degree to which we're going to allow big companies to get bigger and buy out their competitors. So anyway, that's another segue to the classroom that I think would be a very relevant and potentially lively conversation as we talk about Facebook specifically, and also other companies in our country. And what does antitrust mean today, and where do you draw that line?
Well, and another twist on the antitrust piece is that if Facebook is collecting your data at night, and a Facebook associated educational nonprofit's collecting your data during the day, right? And that's extremely oversimplification, right? Like, I get that that's not exactly what's happening here, but I think that at some point, the other article I shared that kind of touches on the complexity of some of this, and speaking of great things you can discuss with your students, the notion that you can't, or that why you can't regulate Facebook, and one of the reasons why is because it's extremely messy, right? Like it's not a First Amendment thing. It's way more complicated than that. And I remember getting a discussion about a year ago. My wife and I started doing this was a very small Facebook-based campaign where we wanted to get friends that lived in our town to commit to subscribing to the local newspaper if they would turn off offline commenting on their website, because the online comments, as it turns out, is a toxic mix of doom, in my humble opinion, in most major newspapers. And as it turns out, my wife called the publisher of the newspaper, and they were already planning on going that direction anyways. And so we subscribed like good citizens and gave them our support, as did many of our friends. And what the pushback I received, and interestingly enough, it was a mix between conservatives and liberals I was friends with on Facebook, was that a lot of them were concerned about the First Amendment. But keep in mind, you do not have a right to express stuff on Facebook. You just don't. You have a right to express, right? But in 2018, it is effortless. It would take literally less than a minute to create a worldwide access blog where you can type almost anything you want without repercussion or recourse, because the First Amendment, by the way we've interpreted the First Amendment in the United States for over 200 years, is alive and well. But that's where Facebook challenges things, right? Like, do you have a right to speak out on Facebook? Can Facebook take away your right? Well, the answer is maybe, and then it's complicated. And so that's why these things are so sticky. So very much, yeah, it's one of the reasons why I miss being in the classroom right now, because if I were still teaching government, which is one of my favorite subjects to teach, there's a little bit to talk about in 2018, as it turns out.
Absolutely. Well, shout out. We've got another guest that's here with us live. And if you want to join in our chat, shout out to Peggy George. Peggy, I hadn't read this article, but she was saying that, speaking of Facebook and WhatsApp, that I guess DHS is utilizing WhatsApp tracking to find out what participants are planning in the caravan and paying informants within the caravan. Good grief. It is just kind of incredible today how challenging it is to sort fact from fiction, and whether it's, shootings in Florida and charges of crisis actors, or just the deep fakes now that are happening with video, and how we're going to need to start questioning video every bit as much as we question a photograph that could be doctored with Photoshop. What a day for media literacy. What a day for critical thinking, right? Got to have that everywhere. Also, we are going beyond the top of the hour because we started about 20 minutes late. So we will probably go, I would predict, 20 to 25 minutes or so past the top of the hour. Jason, where would you like to go? You are definitely you contributed more quantity today to our links and all. So where else do you want to take us tonight?
Let's do some kind of harder tech news. Interesting stuff going on in Chrome world in the last couple of weeks. And I have to say that, as a reminder, I am a primary Chromebook user now. And one of the signs of that being true is that in the last 9 months, I only travel with a Chromebook now. I used to be, I used to travel with a Chromebook and then have a MacBook or a backup PC laptop sitting in a bag somewhere in case, the going got rough and I needed to go to a quote unquote real computer. But I am a full-time Chromebook user now, and a very, very happy one at that. But some interesting things going on. First, the Chrome Unbox reports today that the Samsung Chromebook Plus version 2, which is one of the best form factors that has existed over the last year, and I believe that's the 4x3 factor, so the more squarish looking Chromebook. And they've had a couple of different versions. It's been considered to be one of the best Chromebooks in the last 12 months. They're now starting to release a version with an M3 chip, which is the mobile Intel chip that's close to the so-called i3 chip. And the reason why that's important is because Chromebooks have relied for a long time on very low-end chips, and that's one of the reasons why they're such inexpensive devices. But based on the desires of power users like me, most folks that are in the Chrome business are starting to put out very advanced Chromebooks that have speedier chips in them, which makes them not just an efficient battery-wise and a nice simple platform to use, it also makes them great for power users. And so I just want to mention that because now mainstream Chromebooks, not just the super high-end ones available from folks like Google, but mainstream Chromebook manufacturers starting to add additional chips to that. But in light of that, I want to remind everyone that it's Black Friday this Friday, which is a big tech day every year. I've never participated in Black Friday in all my many years of being a nerd, which as I think I've also mentioned on this podcast, that it doesn't hurt my nerd credibility. And also the fact that I've never seen a Star Wars movie doesn't help my nerd credibility either. So
we got to do something about that.
Yeah, I know. You're not the first person to tell me that even this month. But the fact that Black Friday is here. If you are interested in buying a Chromebook, the Pixel Book, which is the 2017 model that Google released, is still a wonderful buy. I bought one earlier this summer on mega discount for just $650, and it was worth every dollar I spent on it. But there are a number of great Black Friday deals taking that Chromebook down to under $700. And I put a link to a wonderful article from Chrome Unbox, which is by far my favorite kind of Chrome OS based blog, talking about how it's still a premier laptop even a year after its release. And so if you are looking for a bargain, or if you've always been on kind of a slow older Chromebook, or you really want to give a good alternative to the great hardware from Apple or Microsoft to try at $700, the Pixel Book, the original Pixel Book from 2017, is an excellent bargain. So, and I put a little link there if you want the version from Amazon, which is available right now. The low end one is $699. So an excellent, super excellent buy if you're interested in a higher end Chromebook.
Very good. I'll pick up a quick surveillance article. This is from Quartz on November the 9th. I think I'm actually bringing this forward from a past week. But the title of the article is "The DEA and ICE Are Hiding Surveillance Cameras in Streetlights." And according to government procured data, the DEA has paid a Houston, Texas company called Cowboy Streetlight Concealments, LLC, roughly $22,000 since June 2018 for video recording and reproducing equipment. ICE paid out about $28,000 over the same period of time. And they include an advertisement for the covert traffic barrel shell. It requires Boundless's 5-megapixel embedded smart UPTZ camera. And so basically this thing looks like a regular orange and white traffic barrel, but it has an embedded camera inside. And so I guess this, makes me think about the kind of inevitability of the surveillance state in, areas like China and even London. But, the different parts of the world are more advanced with this than others. But I think there is an inevitability to some of this. We're going to see some backlash and some pushback. Of course, it's always a little disconcerting when you've got a public service group like a police department or, a city government that might, be concealing some of the things that they're doing here. You would think that, this would just be some open, overt kind of stuff. It's not like we're hiding surveillance equipment in a Turkish embassy, that might, have international repercussions if what they record comes out. Of course, I'm referencing what happened with Jamal Khashoggi about a month ago. But anyway, the surveillance state, here it is. And actually, I should put in here another Geek of the Week that the Richard Byrne just tweeted, which is a pretty great website about identifying fake news, because we all need to be thinking about this whenever we see something that, I don't know, just kind of pushes our buttons a little bit. Like, wait a minute, is this real? Is this legit? So yeah, I think we are not going to be sharing articles here on the EdTech Situation Room, which do not, which we think obviously are fake news or are not credible here. But anyway, this is something that I see this as an ongoing example of where we're moving with surveillance. And from an education standpoint, these things are being normalized, right? We're all just kind of getting used to it. But I think it's important for us, and I'm thinking about kind of a 1984 Orwellian, perspective, like, what is too much? What does too much surveillance look like? And, Is that a place for student advocacy and for student voice in thinking about even surveillance within the school environment? There's not really some clear lines that are being drawn there, and I think schools, like many other organizations, are continuing to look at how these tools of surveillance are going to be able to help schools stay more secure and be safer, but at what cost?
Yep, absolutely. On those security lines, I dropped a couple articles in about kind of the run-of-the-mill hacking news of the week. Another Amazon, this time it's a username and address leak, which is a relatively low-end offense. But the point of the article was that it's happening pretty regularly, that Amazon issues are being uncovered. It's compared to, some of the data leaks with usernames and passwords that's happened in many other sites. That's a relatively low end one. And then there's another fascinating article from CNET. This was from yesterday, that basically there's a Russian hacking tool available that I read the article twice and I didn't really understand how the tool worked. But basically, an email can be sent to you that you don't even need to click on before it somehow enables a hacking. I don't really understand how that works, but they did mention that some of the social engineering tools are becoming more clever. The social engineering, for those that aren't up on your hacking parlance, social engineering is the notion of encouraging people to kind of do your bidding for you by tricking them in some way. The classic one is putting thumb drives in like a bank parking lot that have malicious code on them. A bank employee picks that up in the parking lot, sticks it into their computer, and it unloads a payload of malware which can steal information. More recent ones are, if you've ever received a fake like Google Docs notification that someone's trying to share a doc with you, and you click on the username and password and it takes you to a fake login site that steals your login information. In fact, I heard a more complicated one a couple of weeks ago on the Reply All podcast on the Gimlet network, where they tried to hack their own company to see who would do that. And as it turns out, they were able to capture the CEO and the CFO of the company, the founders of the company. With that, they had an enormously complex hacking system that I think might have actually caught me if I wasn't too careful. But basically, they set up a fake domain that looked close to their domain but was one character off. And there was someone sitting in a computer lab elsewhere that sent a fake email from the fake domain, and then you clicked on it, and it was a fake login account, but they had two-factor authentication turned on, but they just in real time used that username and password to get the two-factor authentication, send it to the hacker so they could get into your account. It was the craziest thing I'd ever seen or ever heard of, and it's brilliant and scary at the same time. But this new Russian hacking tool, and the article about it talks a little bit about that there are a lot of complex social engineering tools, some of which you've probably seen ones that have bad Word documents that have malicious code in them. Well, there are some that you open up the document and it's just blank, and in the background it's downloading a piece of malware that, again, has a nasty payload in it. So, for no other reason, be careful out there, kids, because the hackers are out there. So
we've seen a significant uptick in phishing attacks at our school. The last 2 weeks, I've had to send out messages to all of our staff, either alerting them to the fact that we've got phishing occurring. Most recently, this last week, and I'm able to go in to our Google Vault, which is an e-discovery tool. We use that occasionally when we have to, respond to a subpoena or something like that for data. I had to do that this summer, actually, for the first time. But anyway, you can go in and query and, find out, so this was a fake Gmail account that somebody had set up to look like a couple different people at our school. And in one case, that message was sent to 94 different members of our faculty and staff. Thankfully, only one of them responded and replied and engaged with that person. We've got to keep talking about this. We've got to keep reminding people there are folks out there trying to trick us. To your point, yes, it can look like a very genuine, sharing a Google Doc with you. How do you need to go to that? You need to go to your browser window, open a new tab, and put in drive.google.com, and then go to shared with me. Don't be clicking on any kind of a link that then asks you for authentication.
Right.
This is stuff that everybody needs to know now, right? This is not just, things for the business office, things for, whatever. And I had a conversation with some of our administrators this week about how glad I am about two-step verification. We rolled that out about a year ago. We took almost a year to get everybody on board. I absolutely, as a technology director, believe that everyone should be on two-factor authentication for email. The degree to which you can bring your student information system and other kinds of platforms that especially have student information, confidential information, bringing those either into that same single sign-on with two-factor or having their own two-factor, doing that for your banking, doing that as much as you can. It's critical because, if there's one theme we've probably had a lot of in this show, it's about hacks and security. And, like you said, be careful out there, kids. So that's going to be a continuing mantra that will not end anytime soon.
I want to add one other tool that we've used recently at the Digital Academy. This is called Know Before, which is a testing tool where you can put in email addresses of your faculty or staff, faculty and or staff, and it will send out for up to 100 users a test email to see that looks like a phishing email. And I'm proud to report that 1 out of 100 of our users that we tested clicked on it. Another 18 of them forwarded them on to our support desk asking if it was legitimate. I will tell you it's a pay-for product. You get 100 for free, and then they will do a hard sell. But still, it seems like a good legitimate product. We're evaluating internally to find out if we want to use it in a more long-term way. But Know Before is a great way to do a phishing test of your staff.
And you know what? I've talked to other tech directors who've done that and kind of weighed, hey, is it worth it to pay? Basically, everybody who pays for that finds out that some people get tricked. Yeah. And so we're having live cyber attacks happening on a weekly basis now, which, like I said, the eDiscovery tool, I'm actually able to gather data about how many folks are responding. I was very, very proud and pleased with the response this past week. But hey, it's also something that is going to be affecting BYOD devices and even home computers. I mean, when somebody has been vulnerable, something else, I think I'm going to sneeze, so hang on just a second. Pardon me. We, like many organizations, have emails of our faculty and staff out there on the public directory. I'm going to recommend to our communications department that we change that we actually take all those emails down and we have a contact form where folks are able to submit, messages. But basically, you have to log in to our account and be on our intranet, our parent, student, staff portal in order to access that information. It is just too easy for folks to scrape that data. At some point in the foreseeable future, this would be an extreme case, but we use, like probably every other organization, a common syntax for creating those email accounts. And so it's not too difficult for folks to figure out what that syntax is. I can see a time where we need to do a restart because of spam and because of phishing attacks and those kind of things. We may need to change everybody's email address and, either not use a common syntax or, I don't know, somehow mix that up. But the idea that, hey, I want people to have my email address and my cell phone number, right, it's really dangerous today because of how valuable and important those pieces of information are as keys that unlock confidential information and access to confidential spaces that we just don't want folks to be able to have access to. On Peggy's behalf, I want to do a quick little Apple article. This is one that was a couple weeks old, but it's from 9 to 5 Mac on 9 November. It's called Writing with the iPad Pro, the first 48 hours away from Mac. So just as Jason has been, doing some testing with Chromebook and is pretty comfortable being Chromebook only, the new iPad Pro, which we actually did pick up one of these and are looking at the possibility of giving our teachers an option, whether they want to stick with the last generation MacBook Air that still has the USB-A, drives and, sticking with that model with a faster processor, or, if they feel like they can software-wise, going with an iPad Pro with an external external Bluetooth keyboard. pretty interesting. And this article paints an optimistic picture about just how powerful that iPad is and how viable it is in many use cases to be iPad only. I'll say that after watching Apple's special event after the fact on my Apple TV at home, I was just blown away by the Adobe demo, right? Because they had a 3 gigabyte file that they were just zooming in and zooming out and moving around, and just, you were talking about the processors, going into Chromebooks and these different laptops. It is just astounding the amount of computational power that these processors are capable of putting out. And so anyway, I'm going to be interested. I have a good feeling that we'll probably have some folks experiment with that, going down that road of trying to be iPad only at school. From a management standpoint, as a technology director, it is easier for us to manage an iPad, frankly. Certainly, it's even easier to manage a Chromebook, but then it is a laptop. There's just so many different vulnerabilities and potential issues with software. Having an environment like the iPad where apps are sandboxed and they really don't affect each other, it's just so different than some kind of legacy operating system like Mac OS built on Linux, or the Windows operating system, even with Windows 10 and the improvements that have been made to it. So, Jason, any other articles you'd like to hit quickly before we do some Geeks of the Week?
Let me see. There was one other. Oh, we'll cover this one next time, but this is also a great discussion point for your students. There's a great article from a week or so back. I'm sorry, it's a month back, from The Guardian. It's basically that we've stalled out on expansion of the internet to new populations. And basically the point they're making is that, the internet has made 50% of the world's population, which is impressive, right? That's 3 billion people on the internet. But as it turns out, the next 3 billion are going to be extraordinarily challenging. And there's a lot of energy around this amongst tech companies, but you're going to find that that rate of internet expansion is going to slow down. So we can certainly talk about that in a future episode. But I thought, I know if I were teaching a social studies class, that article would have already been hot off the printer as soon as I ran into that. So internet expansion slowing fairly dramatically.
All right, very good. Well, let's do some Geeks of the Week, and then we'll get out of here. My first ones I'll share actually are a couple blog post challenges. I don't know if this is a Geek of the Week or not, but that first one I already mentioned. Hey, write a blog post. What's your ideal pedagogy? And then tweet that and share that back to Jason at Tech Savvy Teach and me at W Fryer. Let us know. I'd love to hear what your favorite or ideal pedagogy would be as a teacher. And then I think the second one that occurred to me as we were talking about laptops and Black Friday and holidays is holiday laptop shopping advice, right? I'm asked this frequently by parents, by other teachers, folks at our church. So I think I might actually write a post about that, and then I can point people to that. But I'd be interested in how you give advice for folks on what kind of a laptop to possibly go towards, for themselves or for their child, and what are the kind of discriminators, depending on how you see that and making that decision. My main Geek of the Week is a tip, and it is using incognito mode to read articles that would exceed a website quota. So as an example, there were a couple Washington Post articles that are in our show notes, and the Washington Post, like many websites today, will give you so many free articles to read during a month, like maybe 5, but after that, you have to start paying. Now, I'm not saying don't pay for good journalism, right? I think that's fantastic. If you want to do that, that is great. As it stands today, I'm not subscribing to the Washington Post, but I want to keep sharing their articles and amplifying them. And so in a lot of cases, the technology that those companies are using are cookies, which is a digital file that's set on your computer, and then it registers how many times you visit it. So when you use the incognito or privacy mode of your browser, for instance, in Chrome, you go to File and you choose New Incognito Window, and then you go to that article, hey, they're not, cookies are not set in the incognito mode, and they don't realize that you've already read 5 articles. So I actually used that trick today to pull up some of these articles again, which I had looked at before, but because I had seen some other articles. Anyway, my main profile account was at maximum for those kinds of free articles. So maybe I am a bad person for encouraging folks to not pay for journalism. It is just kind of the way the web works. There's different tools that now allow us to, in this case, shroud our identity and prevent web tracking. That might be helpful to some other folks. Jason, what do you have for us this week on your Geek of the Week?
Quick note, I use that tip as well occasionally, even though I've been increasingly paying for more news sources. One notable site that will block you from reading their articles if you are in incognito mode is the MIT Technology Review. I noticed that a couple months ago. They used to be on my weekly look when I was looking for articles for this show, and then I would run into the limit almost right away, and then I'd be like, oops, it looks like you're using incognito mode. Sorry. So they're on to us, Wes.
And Peggy's also talking about the Wall Street Journal. Yeah, this won't get you into websites like the Wall Street Journal that are absolute paywall. Or
Right.
Ed Week, Education Week can be bad about that too, right? They're going to show you the first, sentence and whatever, and then you're just going to have to. In that case, I think you have to register. I don't know, and you have to pay. But the Wall Street Journal, I don't like paywalls like that, and I think journalism. I don't know. We gotta get that figured out. But
no, we do.
Evidently, the MIT Journalism Review they figured some, or is it MIT Journalism or Technology
Review? Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
So the other thing I want to share this week is that I am traveling this week. I'm in Costa Rica for a week with my wife on vacation. In fact, my vacation technically starts tomorrow because I work today. But we are here, and as we've talked about a lot in the past, Wes and I are both very happy T-Mobile customers. And not only do I like the unlimited data and the limited hotspot, the other many things that I have with them, as it turns out, if you buy T-Mobile One Plus, I think it's also T-Mobile One gets this. In general, you get access to free international roaming. But I'm on One Plus. It gives me 256 kilobytes, which is not super fast internet, but good enough data coverage that I touched down yesterday afternoon or yesterday morning in San Jose, Costa Rica, and turned my phone on and had all my text messages waiting for me. I've been able to text in and out. Calls do cost 25 cents a minute, but that's relatively cheap compared to what it used to cost to call internationally. I mean, one call today that's probably going to cost me 75 cents, and then otherwise my time here is free. I used to actually buy SIM cards in target countries, which was actually kind of fun as a geek to suddenly have a French number or a British number, and then so much data for $10 or whatever the cheap SIM card costs. But I like it even better that I can keep my phone number, I can get my text messages, and I've had access to all internet services in Costa Rica. And T-Mobile is pretty unique amongst all the carriers. They have really great international coverage. So T-Mobile, good.
I'll do a shout out to that as well. A year ago, I was in Egypt, in Cairo, for the EduForum conference, and used my T-Mobile SIM card in my Android phone that I had picked up for about $160 or something, and video chatted free from the pyramids back to my wife and daughter over the WhatsApp, app, because hey, LTE data was there at the pyramids, and WhatsApp is free. There's no minute per minute charges at all. It's just internet data, and I had data there, so it was pretty phenomenal.
Yep, awesome.
All right, where can folks find you online?
I was going to say the same thing. I am at Tech Savvy Teach on Google. I also work with the Northwest Council for Computer Education. I'm their Tech Savvy Administrator, blog.ncc.org. And as we mentioned in past weeks, conference information, registration's open, ncc.org/conference19 for more information. What about you, Wes?
One quick answer to Peggy in the chat room. She asked if there's an incognito mode on an iPhone or iPad. Yes, there is. There's a privacy mode in Safari. There is in the Chrome browser. When I'm wanting to be stealth like that, I actually use a nice app by Mozilla called Firefox Focus, which is a entirely privacy enabled browser, which you can't do everything on that, but you can do a whole lot. So I am on Twitter at WFryer. My blog is speedofcreativity.org. Been posting a little bit more on there, and I'll do a shout out also for my weekly newsletter, generally on Sunday nights, sometimes other nights. I've been writing up a tool, text, and a tutorial, which is a short little video. So I've been doing that on a weekly basis, and you can find that at my blog, speedofcreativity.org. But this situation here is the EdTech Situation Room. We are thrilled that you have tuned in. We encourage you to share us with others. You should be able to find us wherever you find our podcasts. My favorite way now to listen to podcasts is to tell my Google Smart Assistant, "Hey G, play the latest episode of the EdTech Situation Room," or whatever it is, and it plays magically. I also love being able to fast forward with my voice. So I'm about to write a post about becoming Harry Potter with my wand, which is my Apple Pencil, and I don't know if spell book is the right analogy for the Smart Assistant, but that allows me to use my voice to do powerful things. So we are on edtechsr.com. Follow us on Twitter at edtechsr. Generally, you will find us here on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Mountain, unless, the unfortunate host gets caught up in, sidetracked movies or something like that, and then is 20 minutes late. So thank you, Peggy, so much for joining us. And we wish everybody in the United States a very happy Thanksgiving. Stay safe and stay savvy, and let us know if you've got any input on the show. We'd love to hear from you.
Good night.